The dusty plains stretched for miles, the golden wheat swaying in the afternoon breeze. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening on the Dawson family farm, until the sound of motorcycles shattered the peace. A gang of outlaws, rough and reckless, rolled up the long dirt driveway, their intentions clear. They had their eyes set on easy money, thinking an old farmer and his daughter would be simple targets. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that the farmer's daughter wasn't just any woman. Riley Dawson had spent years in the military, serving as a Green Beret sniper, one of the best. She had seen war, faced threats far deadlier than a few desperate criminals, and she had walked away stronger. After returning home, she had hoped for a peaceful life, taking care of her father and the land they cherished. But some people bring trouble right to your doorstep. The outlaws stepped off their bikes, their boots kicking up dust as they moved closer to the farmhouse. One of them sneered, thinking this would be an easy job. "Nice place you got here," he called out. "Be a shame if something happened to it." They figured a farmer and his daughter wouldn't put up much of a fight. They had no idea they were about to become the hunted. Riley stood on the porch, her sharp eyes studying each man, calculating, planning. She knew how this would play out. They thought they had the upper hand. They were dead wrong. Because when trouble comes knocking, some people run, others fight, and Riley Dawson, she never misses. Riley's fingers twitched at her sides, her stance relaxed but ready. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't look afraid. And right now, she wasn't afraid. She was assessing, waiting. The outlaws spread out, their leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepping forward. He looked her up and down, smirking like he already knew how this was going to go. "You and your old man are going to hand over whatever cash you got," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "And maybe we don't cause any trouble." Riley didn't blink. She could feel her father watching from the porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing. He was a tough man, a proud man, but age had slowed him down. She had come home to take care of him, not to relive the life she left behind. But life had a way of pulling you back into the fight. "You should leave," she said simply, her voice calm. The outlaws laughed, the sound rough and ugly. One of them, younger than the rest, shook his head. "She's got guts, I'll give her that." Scarface tilted his head, studying her again. Something in Riley's stance must have made him hesitate, just for a second. But arrogance won over instinct. He nodded to his men. "Search the house." Riley's jaw tightened. This was her home. The place she had bled for, sacrificed for. These men thought they could walk in and take what they wanted. They had no idea the kind of storm they had just stepped into. And Riley, she was done waiting. One of the outlaws, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding up his arm, took a step toward the porch, his boots thudding against the wooden steps. Riley didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she watched him the way a hawk watches prey, calculating every inch of space between them. Inside the house, she had weapons, ones she hadn't touched in years, but she didn't need them yet. These men didn't know who they were dealing with, and she wasn't about to show her hand too soon. Her father cleared his throat, shifting behind her. "There's nothing here for you," he said, his voice rough with age but steady. Scarface laughed, slow and mean. "That's so. From what I hear, old man, this land's worth plenty. And I bet there's a nice stash somewhere." He turned to his men. "Tear it apart." Riley felt a familiar fire rise in her chest, the same one that had carried her through deployments, through the long silent nights in enemy territory. Her instincts screamed at her to strike first, to end this before it got worse. But she forced herself to stay still. Timing was everything. The younger outlaw hesitated. He was tall, lanky, maybe in his early 20s, too young to be running with men like these. His fingers twitched at his belt, his eyes flicking toward Riley then away. He wasn't sure about this. Maybe he still had a conscience. Riley filed that away. If things went sideways, he might be the crack in their armor. Then, without warning, Scarface grabbed her father by the collar and yanked him forward. "Let's make this simple," he snarled. "Tell me where the money is, or things get ugly." Riley's heart pounded. They had just made a fatal mistake. Riley moved before she even thought about it, stepping down from the porch, her boots hitting the dirt with quiet precision. The gang barely noticed, too focused on her father, but Scarface did. He tightened his grip on the old man's collar, his eyes narrowing. "Stay where you are," he warned. Riley didn't. She kept walking, slow, deliberate. She didn't need a weapon in her hands to be dangerous. She had spent years mastering control of her breathing, of her pulse, of the moment right before action. "Let him go," she said, her voice calm but firm. Scarface smirked, but there was a flicker of doubt behind his eyes now. Something about her didn't fit the picture he had in his head. She wasn't scared, she wasn't pleading. She was measuring him. One of his men, the one with the snake tattoo, took a step toward her. "Or what?" he taunted. "You gonna call the cops?" Riley smiled, just a little. "No," she said. Then she moved. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the outlaw's wrist, twisting it hard enough that he yelped in pain. Before anyone could react, she drove her elbow into his ribs, knocking the air out of him. He stumbled back, cursing. For a moment, silence stretched across the farm. The gang wasn't laughing anymore. Scarface shoved Riley's father away, his hand going to his belt. "Big mistake," he growled. Riley didn't hesitate. She dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, a cloud of dust rising around him. The others scrambled, startled, caught off guard. But Riley wasn't done. The fight was just getting started. The dust hadn't even settled before the others snapped out of their shock. The younger outlaw, the one who had hesitated earlier, took a step back, his hand hovering near his belt. He wasn't sure what to do, torn between following orders and the clear realization that they had picked the wrong target. But the others weren't thinking, they were reacting. Snake Tattoo lunged at Riley again, rage burning in his eyes. She sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing his arm and using his own momentum against him, sending him crashing into the side of an old wooden fence. He groaned, struggling to get up, but Riley didn't have time to focus on him. Scarface was already back on his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. His expression had changed. The amusement was gone. Now, he looked at Riley like she was a problem that needed to be solved, fast. "You're full of surprises," he muttered. Riley's face silent, her stance steady, her heartbeat slow and controlled. She could handle them, she knew that. But something in her gut told her this wasn't over. And she was right. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Riley tensed. The sound came from beyond the barn, a signal. Then from the tree line, more figures emerged. 5, maybe 6 more outlaws, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. Reinforcements. Her jaw tightened. They hadn't just come looking for money. This was bigger, more organized. They had a plan, and they weren't leaving empty-handed. Scarface grinned, cracking his knuckles. "You're tough," he said, "but you're outnumbered." Riley exhaled slowly, glancing at her father. He was watching, tense but trusting her. Outnumbered? Maybe. Outmatched? Not a chance. Riley didn't move. She let the moment stretch, reading the outlaws the way she had once read enemy movements in the field. They were confident, sure of their numbers. But numbers didn't win fights, skill did, and Riley had more than enough. Scarface gave a sharp nod, and his men rushed forward. The first one swung at her, sloppy, predictable. She ducked, grabbing his arm and twisting him down onto the dirt with a swift takedown. Before the next one could react, she pivoted, slamming a knee into his gut, sending him staggering. Her father had retreated to the porch, gripping a shovel, ready to fight if he had to. But Riley wasn't letting them get that far. Snake Tattoo came at her again, this time with a knife. He was faster than the others, but Riley was faster. She sidestepped, caught his wrist, and wrenched it back, making him drop the blade. In the same motion, she drove her elbow into his jaw, knocking him out cold. Scarface cursed under his breath. The reinforcements hesitated. They hadn't expected this. Then, from the corner of her eye, Riley saw movement. The younger outlaw, the one who had seemed unsure, was reaching for something in his jacket. A gun. Her instincts screamed at her to act, but before she could move, he did something no one expected. He turned, not toward her, but towards Scarface. Enough, the young outlaw said, his voice steady. The others froze. Scarface glared at him. "What do you think you're doing?" "Walking away," he said, his grit firm. "And so should you." For a moment, the air was thick with tension. Then, one by one, the others backed off. Scarface's jaw clenched, but he knew the fight was over. He spat onto the dirt, locking eyes with Riley. "This ain't over." Riley tilted her head. "Yeah, it is." She stood her ground as they retreated, watching until the last engine faded into the distance. Only then did she let out a slow breath. Her father stepped forward. "Didn't think I'd ever see a fight like that again," he murmured. Riley gave him a small smile. "Me neither." But as she turned back toward the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about money. Those men had been looking for something. And whatever it was, they'd be back. The night air was cool against Riley's skin as she stood on the porch, watching the last traces of dust settle from where the outlaws had disappeared. The farm was quiet again, the way it should be. But she knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Her father sighed, rubbing his hands together as he looked out over the land. "They'll be back," he muttered. "Men like that don't take kindly to losing." Riley nodded. "I know." But there was no fear in her voice, just certainty. She glanced toward the barn, toward the worn wooden fence where the fight had played out. This was home, and she had fought for it once. She would fight for it again if she had to. But something about tonight felt different. Those men weren't just looking for cash. They had come expecting more. The younger outlaw, the one who had turned on his own, lingered in her thoughts. He had made a choice. Maybe he hadn't wanted this life in the first place. Maybe tonight he saw a way out. Riley let out a slow breath. "We should get some rest," she said finally. Her father gave her a tired smile. "You always did have a way of handling trouble." She chuckled softly. "Learned from the best." Inside, the house was warm and familiar, filled with memories stronger than any threat. As she locked the door behind them, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't running. If trouble came knocking again, she'd be ready. Because some people fought for a paycheck, others fought for survival. But Riley Dawson, she fought for home, and that was a fight she would never lose.